To my far left is the athletic director of Villanova University, someone I've known a long time back when he was with the Oakland Raiders, soon to be Las Vegas Raiders, Mark Jackson. To his right is Mike Nardi. Jay Wright was going to come, but our own Josh Hart is up for the Wooden Award this weekend, so Jay is with him, and he has asked Mike Nardi, who's director of men's basketball operations here at Villanova, so we're glad to have Mike. And Vince Nicastro, as you know, 15-year AD here at Villanova. I was lucky enough to have him assist me for a year before the Big East stole him. He is the COO and Deputy Commissioner of the Big East. And to my near left, Oliver Luck, Executive VP of the NCAA. Oliver and I go way back. We were general managers together in something called the World League back in the day. He had this little 2-year-old running around named Andrew who was throwing the ball. It turned out to be okay. Let's give them a warm welcome. I'll start with you, Oliver. Coming off the biggest stage for the NCAA this week, and of course, a year ago, here we were with our own Villanova team being the kings of that stage. And actually, a year ago was her parade in downtown Philly, or a year ago today, for the Villanova basketball team. But coming off that, I think there's always stuff in the news about where is the NCAA now? There is so much money coming in. Money seems to be the focus, and consolidation, and athletes being the faces of this, and what is their compensation, the scholarship, the issue of pay for play. I would just like you to address sort of where we are with the NCAA now in addressing all of the issues around the growing commercialism that people see, and at the end of the day, the student athlete.
Well, good morning, Andrew. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning to all the folks here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm sure I speak for the rest of the panelists that we're delighted to be here this morning. So NCAA, you know, it's a big question. We've got all sorts of issues, and I'll touch on a few of those right off the bat. But I think generally speaking, intercollegiate athletics, our intercollegiate model is relatively healthy. Our signature event, of course, is the NCAA tournament. That's the revenue source that the NCAA national office has, which we use to help fund programs at all three levels, Division I, II, and III. We came off, I think, a very good tournament. I was able to spend a good bit of time with our primary broadcast partners, Turner and CBS. They were both very happy with the results and ratings and all that, and there's no question that it's a very important revenue stream for us, and money drives this industry, right? It costs money to have great coaches like Jay Wright. It costs money to have basketball programs, football programs. Our economics are very unusual in the sense that, you know, we've got football programs at the bigger schools, and then as you look down at some of the non-football Division I FBS schools where basketball is king, like here at Villanova, it's basketball that drives revenue. And we've got a whole bunch of other sports that we support, the so-called Olympic sports, that do not generate revenue, do cost money, but are very valuable for the broad-based programming that we want schools to do. So I think in general, the industry, the enterprise is fairly healthy. We've had a number of cases over the last 4 or 5 years that have been resolved, not in all cases going up to the Supreme Court, like the O'Bannon case, which cert was denied by the Supreme Court, but the Ninth Circuit obviously weighed in. And I think what those court decisions have done is sort of draw a box around the space in which we can operate. They've given us some clarity in terms of how intercollegiate athletics can operate. And I think in that sense, you know, our intercollegiate model, the amateur model, has become relatively well defined. I think what you've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, and I think what you'll continue to see, is the amateur model being improved, and that's simply providing additional benefits to student athletes. So historically, a scholarship was defined as room, books, board, tuition, fees. Many folks who follow this know last year many of the larger schools, and even some of the smaller schools, I'm sure you're doing this for your basketball programs here on the men's and the women's side, we added cost of attendance. We allowed schools to provide cost of attendance to their student athletes. There's discussion about additional benefits in some of those spaces where consistently our student athletes tell us that they're not able to do these things. Internships, right? There's always a complaint, can't do internships because we're too busy practicing in season or out of season. We can change the clock, right, to allow an internship. Study abroad programs. A lot of kids want to study abroad, can't do it because they're worried about losing their position on a team and coming back and finding themselves second team as opposed to being a starter. So we can change the clock, and that's simply sort of NCAA talk for figuring out a way to provide additional benefits for those student athletes. Insurance, which is an issue. A lot of folks leave college athletics with lingering injuries, be they knee injuries or shoulder or whatever. Perhaps there's a way for us to provide some additional insurance coverage for those student athletes. So I think what you're seeing is benefits being looked at that at the end of the day would be beneficial to student athletes that can make their experience as student athletes better. I don't hear anybody within our enterprise who's advocating for a salary model, right? That's just not something that's out there. There are folks who have raised the issue of perhaps a group license, which is obviously a different model. And those discussions, I'm sure, will continue to happen. But I think at the end of the day, the enterprise is relatively healthy. If the last 6 or 7 years could be termed as a litigious time for the NCAA and for amateur athletics and the intercollegiate model, I think the next 5 or 6 years won't be defined by litigation so much as it will be defined by economics. I think the big challenges that we're facing are the economics of some of our FCS schools, some of the schools lower in Division I, who simply need more dollars to run their programs. We saw just recently that the University of Buffalo dropped 4 sports, I think men's soccer being one of them. And I think those are the concerns that I think will bubble up over the next 5 or 6 years, because it's a challenge, right? Higher ed has a significant challenge, certainly for state schools, in terms of their appropriations from state legislatures, and athletic departments are feeling the effects of that as well. So I think it'll be an era of economic stress, maybe as opposed to the past 5 or 10 years, which were an era of sort of litigation stress.
And speaking of that, Vince, on the conference side, so you've seen all the Big East from a lot of different levels, now being their COO, and you've seen what Oliver just talked about, these changes. Maybe take us through that from your angle, and the fact that the Big East, of course, has gone through some major changes, moving away from a football model into a more basketball model. With football being kind of the big elephant in the room in college sports, you've taken it to a basketball conference and been very successful.
Yeah, so when we made the decision as the Catholic 7 to split a little over 4.5 years ago, I guess, there was certainly some anxiety about that, separating ourselves from this model that had included big-time football programs, but also great basketball brands, schools like UConn and Syracuse and Louisville and West Virginia and others. So there was a fair amount of uncertainty when we did that, to be quite honest. Could we continue to compete in this environment where there was this consolidation of resources at the very top, predicated upon FBS football programs? Could we find a national platform of exposure for our programs? And some of those questions. And, after 4 years, I think, largely due to the efforts of our 10 members, doubling down on basketball and being basketball-centric. And as one of our ADs said in a meeting early on, is we can't spend enough money on men's basketball. So there's a real intentional focus on trying to use men's basketball to be the fuel for our conference, our 10 members, but also for our other programs to stay competitive. I also think that the 3 new members that we've brought into the league to add to the Catholic 7 have really added a tremendous amount of value, and their entry into the Big East has helped them grow and helped the other 7 also grow. So, after 4 years of this configuration, you've seen us move from, I think, a great deal of uncertainty to now this steady growth where we've had a national champion here at Villanova. 70% of our teams make the NCAA tournament this year, with 2 of them making the second weekend. So, again, I don't think we'll take it for granted as a membership and as a conference, but this ability to compete at the highest level in basketball, we've been able to sort of figure that out in this really dynamic time.
Yeah, and Mark, I've heard you and Vince say the following statement, and correct me if I'm not paraphrasing the right way, is that we have 20-something sports, 1 makes money. So that's something people don't see about the NCAA, about college sports. They see all the money of March Madness and college football. They don't realize these 20-something other sports. Your challenges in dealing with that, of course, we're known for basketball. That's the driver. But managing the operation and all of these issues Oliver and Vince talked about, cost of attendance, all those things, how do you manage that in this changing environment of college sports?
Yeah, it's a very difficult model for us, and we're in a unique situation, and luckily we have a wonderful partnership with the Big East and with the NCAA as well, and I do think we're in overall a very healthy situation here at Villanova, but nonetheless it is a broken financial model. You have 24 sports, we have over 600 student athletes, and we have 1 program in men's basketball that generates a little bit of revenue. And we maximized our revenue last year. Last year was a really good snapshot of what we could produce if we win a national championship, from the conference payouts with television, from licensing and retail, and obviously your brand exposure and the way we increased our value there. And we saw that as a result with the university, and our applications are up, the whole thing. But at the end of the day, if you compare us to maybe Oliver's former school at West Virginia, and even if West Virginia did not qualify for the NCAA tournament last year, they're working on a completely different revenue model, like 5x of what we earned last year after winning the national championship. So at Villanova, we have a significant challenge, and we'll forever be subsidized by the university, in order to make our department run. That's a fact. And with us, which separates us even further from everybody else, we don't have FBS football, we have FCS football. There isn't a chance for us with football to generate any significant revenue, but nonetheless, we're supporting 60 scholarships at $60,000 a year, in addition to the other 22 programs that lose revenue. So for us, before we can look forward into any kind of pay-for-play scheme or trying to maximize what we do across the board, we have to meet the fundamental demands of each program, which in my mind boil down to 3 buckets, right? It's scholarships, which for us, about 2/3 of our program aren't fully scholarshiped. It's staffing, and right now we have varsity programs that have part-time head coaches, which is an issue for us. And the last one is facilities. And not every facility at Villanova looks as nice as this one. Anybody that's been in Nevin Fieldhouse, it hasn't been touched since 1932, I think, Vince.
How old were you then, Oliver? 1932.
But, and because we're subsidized and because we work real collaboratively here at the university, we have to weigh the needs of Nevin Fieldhouse versus Tollentine Hall and versus our Mendel Laboratory. So we have to work closely together and how that plays out across the university campus. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge. But we do have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to reduce the reliance upon that subsidy by maximizing a new arena on campus, by looking at the different revenue streams that are created through that. And so we're in the midst of that process. You look at your multimedia rights deal, how can you maximize those opportunities with sponsors? We have a philosophy, we don't want to cut our way to greatness. We'd never want to get, no athletic director ever wants to cut a sport. We'd rather go out and find ways to raise revenue to support all 24 programs, all 600 plus athletes, but easier said than done.
And staying with that, what Oliver's talking about with cost of attendance and the Power Five and the increasing benefits given to top players in top sports, that's a major challenge. And maybe Vince and you guys can talk about, you instituted the cost of attendance at some point for men's basketball, for women's basketball. What about other sports? What has that challenge been? When you see these bigger schools, do you worry? Like, how are we going to keep up, even with the program that we have in basketball?
Yeah, I think, again, it speaks to the partnership we have with the Big East. I think we look a lot of these issues collectively, unlike some of the other places I've been. So, for us to look at, a sport that we can support like soccer, we all do really well at soccer. We've had tremendous success at that. And I think collectively we've looked at that with the presidents, and the presidents have made a commitment to assuring that, soccer would be the next program that we would go out and look at full cost of attendance. So I think as long as it fits the profile of the Big East and what we can all do well collectively, the better off we'll be. So that's sort of the approach we've taken as it relates to full cost of attendance and those issues. But at the same time, you have to be realistic in terms of you can't do it across the board. And I will say, from the NCAA standpoint, Oliver brought up student-athlete welfare, and we just received a wonderful dividend program, right, Oliver, on student-athlete welfare, and a sizable chunk of change that we can put towards specifically student-athlete welfare. So we're all in this together, trying to find ways to make everybody benefit.
Mike, on the granular level, now dealing with the athlete, what changes have you seen? I mean, you're a former athlete, basketball player, played overseas. Now you're dealing with these guys. Again, what a name, Villanova, to recruit with. But changes over the years that you've seen, what student athletes are looking for, the whole, again, our theme, the millennial generation and social media, all those challenges, if you talk about that.
Yeah, it's been a very surprising thing to me to see how the internet has really changed college athletics. Just the empowerment of each individual to kind of voice their opinion and just kind of express on how they're feeling about being paid as college athletes. And I graduated 10 years ago, and I think the NCAA, they're making the right strides to try and kind of take care of the college athletes in a way that it's the right thing to do. And with the cost of attendance, I think that's something that's been something important, because they're doing a lot of things for the university, and I think it's only right that in some aspect they kind of get, besides academically, repaid for that, in a small way, in something that's kind of, I guess you could say, not like a professional athlete, but close to it, because they do see the major TV contracts and the professionals that are now being paid at such a high level. And, even though the model's not the same as far as how much money they're bringing in, it's kind of similar to the fact that the pros are being paid.
Yeah, on that, Oliver, when you see students, I don't know if the word is protest, but you see these sort of activism coming out, and it's about change, whether it's Nigel Hayes of Wisconsin or the Missouri football situation last year. How does that resonate within the NCAA offices? And again, you guys have made changes to improve cost of attendance, all these little things that add up for college athletes.
I think that at the NCAA national office, activism is viewed favorably, and that might be a surprise to most folks, but at the end of the day, we really think it's important for student athletes to be students. And when you think back of your time on campus, you got involved with issues that you felt strongly about, felt passionately about. So I'll be honest, when Missouri football players had their little activity, when was it, a year and a half ago or so, I thought that was great, because it showed that the student athletes, in that case the football players at Missouri, were not sort of siloed off in their athletic dormitory and weren't really a part of sort of the vibe that was taking place on campus. So I think we view student activism as a good thing, because that's part of what college is all about. We believe, and people can roll their eyes and and certainly in some cases it's justifiable, but we believe that it's important for students to be engaged in non-athletic activity on campus, whether that's, other extracurriculars or just a chance to go down and listen to a lecture and meet folks from other walks of life. That's important. That's part of the student-athlete experience. So when we see activism, I think we feel it's a positive.
And on the ground here, Mark, when you, for instance, the big issue in the fall, the Kaepernick, right before kind of the basketball season was starting up, is that something you were worried about? Is it something you meet with Coach Wright about? Do the players have their own issues about what they're going to do, and how much governance did you provide with that?
Yeah, I think it's something we all worry about to a certain degree, and you have to pay attention to. And to Mike's point, the way you reach student athletes today and the way they express themselves today, it's instantaneous, and you better be prepared to react the right way. So the best that you can do is open up dialogue and discourse, and we asked each one of our head coaches to talk about the Kaepernick incident. Fortunately, with the only thing we had really going on in the fall at that time was our football program, and those teams stay in the locker room during the national anthems. It gave us a little window of time to talk about men's basketball, and Jay was out front. And there were some strong opinions. You could follow Josh Hart or Chris Jenkins' Twitter account, and you'd know they had strong opinions about that. And you can't pretend that they're not there. You have to find a way to incorporate them. And that's just one issue. How do we educate our student athletes on the way to promote themselves successfully through their individual brand? And I hope you guys are all sticking around for Erica Nardini today, because she's phenomenal and she understands this world probably better than anybody in terms of how to promote. She's promoting different things through Barstool Sports, but she's brilliant. So the more that I can have conversations with people like her or with people like Twitter, and we have a board member that's on Facebook, and to bring those people around and how to manage that and what's coming next is really important. That's one element. What consent means on a college campus today, that's a whole nother way that we have to connect and reach these student athletes, because that's a huge issue. It's different than when we were in school. So it's constant. It's a constant education where you're constantly looking at examples from across the country and trying to learn from them and be proactive. So I guess to answer your question overall, it's just to open the dialogue and to make sure that our students know that their voice is being heard.
Yeah, and Vince, you got to deal with it from the conference angle. So whatever's happening on Villanova, I'm sure other schools are noticing we want to be treated fairly or more fairly, whatever the case may be, and you have to manage all those different issues.
For sure, and in that particular case with the Kaepernick and the national anthem, we were tracking on it, and at the end of the day, we felt like that was an institutional issue, right? We encouraged the institutions to work with their student athletes and, again, encourage this type of activism, frankly. So we weren't going to be in a position of having a conference mandate about national anthem and what students could or couldn't do. And then in October, I think, when we met with just a regular ADs meeting, we did have a little bit of an open forum where the ADs could exchange ideas about what they were doing on each of their campuses to compare and contrast how they were handling it. But in this particular instance, we felt like this was an institutional matter. We supported it and then tried to foster some communication amongst the 10 schools to help the ADs sort of navigate an issue that's new and fairly difficult to manage.
And Mike, does Coach Wright, do you guys actually sit down with athletes, talk about the things we're talking about, the Twitter, the Facebook, Snapchat, that it's out there permanently, it's not only to your friends, it's to the world, and it's unerasable even though you can delete it. So does that come up? I mean, do these guys know that their brand carries, and that's the word, they have a brand now?
Right, and one thing we always try and stress to our guys is that, you're always representing yourself, your family, and then while you're here at Villanova University. And it's really important for those guys to understand that, anything that you put out there is affecting everyone that's connected to you. And we always go over all of the social media things with our guys that are, fresh and new, that are going on, each and every day. And I think it's important that they understand the effect that they can have in a positive manner to society. And that's one thing that we talked about with the Kaepernick. We met as a team, and coach asks each individual guy their opinion on it. And I think the message that we wanted to convey as a whole team was something positive. Just trying to bring people together in a positive way, but still expressing, the point that they wanted to get across.
And we've mentioned Josh Hart or Chris Jenkins. I mean, beyond Jay Wright, they are as big a brand for Villanova as anyone out there. So, you have athletes that understand that responsibility. I know it's hard at a very young age.
Right, yeah, and it is. I mean, there are professional athletes that struggle with it, that don't want to be in that spotlight, but you just have no choice, and you really have to take every situation, every situation into consideration when you're being approached by someone that you meet for the first time, or a picture that you're posting on social media, because that's going to be the lasting sight of someone that sees your account.
Oliver, we're at a law school, so you mentioned the litigation. We're sort of away from that now with the O'Bannon decision, denied cert in the Supreme Court. Of course, we had O'Bannon on the stage last year through Skype. Pending litigation, we've talked about this Jeffrey Kessler lawsuit, which, for lack of a better term, is kind of a pay-for-play. Obviously, you oppose that. Do you see you say the litigation phase is ending. How do you approach that lawsuit? How do you continue to get the message that that's not the right model you're looking for?
The litigation phase, I think, is slowing down. So
Right.
I'm not sure it's ending. I'm just given the size and the breadth of intercollegiate athletics with 1,100 schools and 460,000 student athletes. I think we'll still be subject. There's a transfer lawsuit issue that we were discussing a little bit earlier today. So I think we're always going to have some of those. I think it's slowed down a little bit. I think ultimately when folks in the industry or in the enterprise or guys that have formerly played and were student athletes, gals as well, right? Anybody who's been has been touched by the system, I think, just needs to talk about the benefits of being a student athlete. It's a unique system. Nobody else in the world does it. The great universities in Europe, South America, Asia, but nobody does college athletics. Nobody sponsors programs like this with television ratings, et cetera. Andrew, when you and I were over in Europe working for the NFL, I used to get the question all the time from intelligent European sports fans, Mr. Luck, why would 100,000 people buy relatively expensive tickets to go sit in the big house and watch amateurs play American football? They were shocked. They would pay that money for professionals, but not for amateurs. So we're really the only folks in the world that do this, and it's unique. I consider it, without being too trite, I consider it American exceptionalism. And there are reasons we do it, and I think we'll continue to do it. The NCAA, with our system, with the intercollegiate model, is really the only amateur group left. After 1992 and the Dream Team in Barcelona, the Olympics. We're no longer the reserve for amateur athletes. It became, a playground for professional athletes, and maybe they're better off with that system. So we're the last ones doing it. I think there are sort of timeless benefits to young men and young women receiving access to higher ed. We still have a lot of young student athletes, or first-time college student athletes, first-gen student athletes who are using the scholarship for access. I guarantee you there are plenty of folks who probably would never set foot on this beautiful campus but for their athletic prowess. And that's happening all across the country. There are lessons of discipline and et cetera as well that we can all appreciate. And I think that athletics can be a positive force for a university. People say it's the front porch. Sometimes your front porch can be kind of messy, and there's a downside for some schools, obviously. But I think by and large, it's a glue that holds alumni together and holds that sort of connection between the alumni and their alma mater. So I think by and large, it's been a force for good and a force for positive change. 2.5, 3 years from now, in 2019, we will celebrate the 150th anniversary of the first college football game, Rutgers versus Princeton. Rutgers won. I think the last time Rutgers has won a game was back in 1869. I actually, I have to share this with you. I was doing some sort of reading about that initial series. They actually played 2 games, right? And one at Rutgers, one at Princeton. They played with different rules depending on the home field. But the students wanted to play a 3rd game, and both presidents denied that request because they believed that it was taking away focus from academics. Which just shows that we're in a cycle of things haven't really changed that much. But I do think there are some timeless benefits that exist with the collegiate model as we practice it. Not to say that we have always done it very well, not to say we shouldn't change certain things, and that's clearly the case. But I think that it's survived this long because it has some enduring and endearing qualities.
As we look forward, as we wrap up, Vince, what do you look for the next few years or as the future? Do you worry any downside to being a quote-unquote basketball conference with the other sports? And do you see, with the growth of college basketball, March Madness, all the money, that it could have a negative effect on the down-the-line sports?
Yeah, for sure. And as Mark had mentioned, trying to be a elite basketball conference or elite basketball school in this environment, which has changed dramatically over time, the resources will be key, and those resources are tending to be consolidated at the top amongst those 5 FBS power conferences. So it will become more and more competitive, I think, and more difficult for schools that continue to compete who are not in that grouping across the board in every sport. And one of the things I think one of the strategies we're employing as a conference and institutionally is to try to be really intentional and focused. So when we talk about cost of attendance, which is a great benefit and probably long overdue, we're not providing, none of our schools are providing cost of attendance across the board, which is very typical in the Power 5 football conferences where regardless of the sport, all students who are on scholarship will get cost of attendance. We're being very focused on men's and women's basketball and now men's and women's soccer. So I think we'll continue to really look at the landscape and be intelligent and focused about our investments. The collegiate model, as Oliver said, is ever evolving. So I think we're going to see more and more resources being pushed down to the student athletes, which is great. I'm a believer that should be tethered to education, as Oliver mentioned, whether that's study abroad programs or internships or additional resources tied to graduate programs and things. As long as it's tethered to education, it feels like that's in our wheelhouse as opposed to a pay-for-play model. And then just the ongoing challenges of trying to manage the time demands of student athletes. So 148 years ago, universities were concerned about that, and they're still concerned about it, and they should be concerned about it. And then also, I think the sort of ongoing health and safety issues, right? Whether it's concussion, whether it's mental health issues, which are coming to the forefront. So, there are a lot of challenges, although I do agree that college athletics is special. It's in I think, a very strong place. The landscape continues to be very dynamic. So the leadership across the National Association conferences, and most importantly, I think on campuses, really needs to play a key role in how to manage that going forward.
Yeah, with these changes, Mark, what keeps you up at night the next few years? I mean, obviously, we've got this great basketball brand, but you're dealing with all these challenges, as we keep talking about, with all these other sports that people don't see kind of behind the storefront, the front porch.
Right. We're coming up with a strategic vision that will always invest in our flagship and our revenue engine around men's basketball, and that's really important that we keep Jay here and this staff in place. That's really important. I think the continuity of the staff and this culture of our basketball program is paramount. But also to take those 3 buckets around scholarship, staffing, and facilities and apply that across the other 23 programs and how we attack each one specifically. If my lacrosse coach was here, he'd say it'd be scholarships. If my crew coach was here, she'd say it'd be facilities. So how do you find that balance within your budget to move forward and attack those specifically? And how do you create revenue to support them, whether through fundraising or, again, the pavilion project for us? So we're mapping that out with a lot of support from our community. And I'm also anxious to go back to the student athlete welfare legislation and what's coming down the road, which I'm in complete support of. I think finding a balance to allow our student athletes to have a complete collegiate experience. We don't want our athletes trapped, in our athletic facilities. We want them on every corner of campus. We feel it front and center here with the success of our business school. And our student athletes, many of which are engaged in that programming, see these other students landing these great opportunities on Wall Street their junior year that leads to careers in that world. And to Oliver's point, it's very difficult for our athletes to take the sacrifice of leaving summer conditioning or any type of internship or study abroad program because they're going to sacrifice their spot on the team. So that's a tricky balance. But the more that we can do that collectively through the NCAA and through our conference, the more leverage we have as athletic directors to implement those kinds of things. So,
Mike, last question for you, kind of a little off topic, but one thing I hear from Jay Wright all the time, and I've seen him say it to our players, stay hungry and humble. And that's hard for an 18, 19, 20-year-old, especially with the success that they've had and the adulation they get. You pound that message, and I think that's a message beyond sports, obviously.
Yeah, basically for us, each and every season is a different year. And even if a guy is coming back, he's a different player. Whether he be better, whether, he may, have an injury, but each and every year, it's a different team. But we always have the same goal, and that's just playing hard, playing together, playing smart, and playing with pride. And, coach doesn't determine our team's success on wins and losses. It's more or less just playing for each other each and every night we step out on the floor. And no matter how successful you become, just always staying humble and hungry and just doing it together as a collective group.
Mark, Mike, Vince, Oliver, thanks so much. Thanks to our panel here.
thank you.